Welcome to Galactic Audiobooks. I'm Max, and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you subscribe to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Human Resilience in the Face of Alien Scorn. Part 1. The Challenge Begins. Elise Weber felt the heat of the artificial sun beating down on her, her lungs searing with each breath as she pushed through the obstacle course. The air around her felt thick, unnaturally thick, as though the atmosphere itself was trying to resist her every movement. It wasn't just the heat that weighed on her, but the gravity. It was heavier here, much heavier than Earth's, pulling at her limbs, adding to the difficulty. Each step felt like dragging a 100-pound weight behind her, but she kept moving forward, determined not to stop. The obstacle course was designed to test endurance, but not like this. She knew the settings were wrong. The gravity was beyond the regulations for a standard training exercise, the air too dense, the heat almost suffocating. But she was used to discomfort. Her whole life had been a battle against it. With every stretch of her legs, every leap over a wall, every crawl through the mud, she could feel her muscles screaming for relief. Sweat trickled down her forehead, stinging her eyes, but she refused to wipe it away. She had to finish this. She would finish it. As she reached the final wall, a surge of desperation pushed her to climb higher, faster. Her body protested, her arms and legs trembling from exhaustion, but she scaled the wall with the last ounce of energy she had left. Just 3 seconds left. Her heart pounded in her chest, her head spinning, but as she crashed onto the landing pad, the completion lights blinked green. She made it. Barely. Around her, the other cadet aliens from species that had evolved to survive in far harsher conditions had finished minutes ago. They stood in small groups, chatting, laughing, sharing words of encouragement. But no one came to her. No one offered a hand. They just watched, silent and indifferent. Except for Valu. Valu, the youngest cadet from the Meridian species, gave her a small nod. A simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. He was the only one who didn't look at her with disdain. But then, the voice she dreaded most cut through the air. Pathetic display, Cadet Weber. It was Kravox, the Haxar sergeant, his voice deep and sharp, filled with contempt. His exoskeletal plating gleamed under the harsh lights of the simulation chamber, his presence imposing, intimidating. The very sight of him made Elise's chest tighten. He stalked toward her, his purple cranial ridges flushed with what could only be described as satisfaction. The satisfaction of seeing a human fail. This, he continued, is why humans remain unsuitable for Federation military service. Elise's heart sank, but she stood tall, her back straight, her jaw clenched. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Completed within time parameters, sir, she said, voice steady, despite the pounding of her heart. Barely, Kravox snapped, his eyes narrowing. And that's the problem with your species. You operate within such narrow margins that any environmental variations render you useless. The galaxy doesn't accommodate weakness. He turned to the other cadets, gesturing toward her as though she were a specimen in a science experiment. Observe, cadets. Earth mammals evolved on a single world, with minimal environmental variation. Their bodies falter with the slightest temperature shift or gravitational change. In real combat scenarios, such limitations become fatal not just for them, but for their entire unit. His words stung, but Elise didn't let them show. She kept her gaze forward, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she fought to steady her racing heart. Kravox's words cut deeper than he knew. He didn't understand Earth or humans. He didn't understand that her struggles were part of who she was. That overcoming those challenges was what made humans strong. But she couldn't say that. Not here, not now. It would only reinforce his beliefs. Dismissed, Cadet Weber, Kravox barked, turning his back on her. His voice carried, clear and condescending. I trust you'll do better next time. If you survive the next round of training, that is. Elise didn't respond. She turned away, heading toward the decontamination units, her mind swirling with frustration and determination. She wasn't going to let him define her. Behind her, Kravox's voice carried once more, as he spoke to Lieutenant Nyuxel. Humans would die if their temperature changed by a mere double-digit degree, he said with clear disdain. Haxars function in temperature ranges 5 times wider than Earth mammals. Even the Fossor adapt better, and they evolved underground. Elise's fists clenched at her sides, but she didn't stop. She couldn't let his words control her. She couldn't let his arrogance dictate her worth. The rest of the day passed in a blur, training exercises, lectures, and constant glances from the other cadets. She was always different, always isolated. There were 12 humans in the academy, and she was the only one assigned to Kravox's elite planetary defense unit. 3 years of training, and she was still fighting for basic respect. In the mess hall, she sat alone, her meal tray untouched as she methodically consumed her calorie-dense ration pack. The table around her was full of cadets' meridians, Haxars, Fossor, but no one spared her a glance. They never did. But then, a shadow fell across her table. She looked up to find Volyu, the young Meridian cadet, standing there. His silver-gray skin reflected the overhead lights, and for a moment, she thought he might speak, but he simply asked, "Permission to join, Cadet Weber?" Surprised, she nodded. The Meridians usually kept to themselves, socializing only among their own kind. But Volyu, he had seen her struggle. He had seen something in her. As he sat down across from her, he spoke quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your performance today was impressive." Elise raised an eyebrow, unsure if she had heard him right. Impressive? You saw what happened. Kravox didn't. I noticed the control panel readings, Volyu interrupted, his tone steady. Training prepares us for unpredictable conditions, yes. But there's a purpose behind the increased intensity. Elise frowned. Purpose? He leaned in, his voice dropping even lower. Command distributed briefing packets to instructors regarding a biological threat. A parasitic organism discovered in multiple systems, and one detected on Earth. Elise's heart skipped a beat. Earth? The parasite had come to her home planet? Containment protocols failed on 2 outer colonies already, Volyu continued. The organism adapts to environmental countermeasures. And it's growing. The outbreak site is in Earth's northern region's permafrost zones. Elise's stomach tightened. Siberia. Why not just deploy the Federation's standard equipment? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but the weight of the mission felt heavier now. Because, Volyu replied, his gaze turning serious, the storm in Siberia has exceeded standard conditions. We're going in blind. And Kravox, he doesn't see that. Elise nodded, pushing her meal tray aside. She understood. The Federation may have the best technology, but Earth's extreme environments were a different beast entirely. They had underestimated the storm. And she knew it was only a matter of time before they would realize just how much they needed her expertise. But by then, she would be ready. She had to be. Volyu gave her a final look before standing up to leave. We'll see what happens, he said. But I think you'll prove them wrong. For the first time that day, Elise allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't about to let Kravox or anyone else define what she was capable of. Not today, not ever. Part 2, The Threat on Earth. Weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Rumors spread like wildfire across the academy, whispers of a new threat, something far worse than anything the Federation had encountered. A parasitic organism, capable of adapting to nearly any environment, had been discovered on multiple planets. The most alarming part? It had been found on Earth, deep within the frozen wastelands of the Siberian Federal District. Elise felt a deep knot of unease tighten in her stomach when she first heard the rumors. She knew exactly what kind of danger they were heading into. She had lived through the harshest winters on Earth, those bone-chilling Siberian nights that could freeze a man's breath in his chest. These were the kind of conditions that even the most advanced Federation suits might struggle to survive. The Federation's decision to send a team was swift. They needed to contain the parasite before it spread, and Elise's unit under the command of Sergeant Kravox, the Haxar with his cold, unyielding exterior, was mobilized for the mission. As the unit gathered in the briefing room, Elise couldn't shake the sense of dread. Kravox, as always, stood in front, his posture commanding, his black eyes scanning the room. He looked every bit the alien soldier, unmovable, ruthless, and confident in his superiority. Behind him, a hollow projection of Earth flickered, highlighting the northern regions, where the parasite had first been detected. The terrain, marked in dark shades of blue, was icy and unforgiving. The cold was not just an inconvenience, it was a weapon. It could paralyze them, cripple their technology, or even kill them if they weren't careful. Yet, Kravox spoke as if the challenge was beneath him. His disdain for humans was apparent in every word. "This will be nothing more than a trivial task," Kravox declared, his voice booming through the room. "Federation technology is more than capable of handling a few miserable cold weather conditions. We'll deploy, neutralize the parasite, and return with no more than a scratch." But Elise knew better. Kravox didn't understand. He had never faced the biting cold of Earth, the kind of cold that froze your very bones, the kind that could suck the breath from your lungs with a single gust of wind. The Federation's technology might be advanced, but nothing they had could match Earth's ability to throw the kind of environmental curveballs that could make survival an impossible task. Elise's voice broke through the conversation, steady but filled with quiet authority. "The storm in Siberia isn't just a cold snap, sir. It's not a minor inconvenience. It's deadly. We'll need to rethink our approach if we don't want to end up as casualties ourselves. The room went quiet, and Kravox's gaze turned toward her, a flicker of contempt in his expression. Are you suggesting, Cadet Weber, that you understand Earth's weather better than the Federation's experts? Your species can barely survive in anything harsher than a warm summer day. Elise didn't flinch. She had heard this before, from every alien cadet who had passed judgment on her kind. Humans were weak, fragile, incapable of surviving in the harshest of environments. But she knew the truth: humans had learned to survive because of their fragility, not in spite of it. The cold, the storms, the inhospitable environments, they didn't break humans. They forced humans to adapt, to innovate, to outsmart the environment. That's why I'm here, she said calmly. I've been through worse than what we're facing. I've survived those temperatures, those storms. I know what we'll need to do to stay alive. And I know how to beat the cold. Despite the dismissal in Kravox's eyes, a spark of something reluctant respect, maybe flashed through his expression. He said nothing, but the brief silence that followed suggested that her words had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Arrival in Siberia. When the transport ship descended over the Siberian Federal District, Elise's breath caught in her throat. Below them, the landscape was an endless stretch of ice and snow, a stark reminder of Earth's unforgiving beauty. The ground was a patchwork of white and gray, mountains rising like jagged teeth in the distance. But it wasn't just the desolate terrain that made Elise's stomach turn, it was the wind. The wind was fierce, cutting through the air with a bite that made her feel as though her face was being scraped by shards of ice. The temperature measured in real time on the monitor plummeted to an unimaginable -55 degrees Celsius. Elise knew what that meant. In these temperatures, even the best equipment would begin to fail. And no suit, no matter how advanced, was truly immune to the cold. She felt a surge of anxiety as she watched the squad begin to don their environmental suits, designed for multiple conditions but not tested for this extreme climate. The suits were standard Federation issue, strong and durable, but in this kind of cold, even they would struggle. Kravox, as expected, was confident. He dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, insisting that the Federation's technology would keep them safe. But Elise's eyes were fixed on the landscape below, knowing that the storm that raged across the frozen tundra was not something any alien technology could easily overcome. As the transport ship began its descent toward the landing site, the exterior sensors screamed in protest. The turbulence was unlike anything they had encountered during training. Every violent jolt of the ship sent shocks through their bodies, rattling them inside the craft. Elise could hear the warning beeps from the cockpit. Wind speeds were reaching 90 kilometers per hour, pushing their transport off course. Kravox stood at the front, his posture stiff and unshaken. "This is nothing," he declared with a sneer. "Federation transports have been through methane storms and solar flare conditions. A terrestrial weather pattern is beneath us." But Elise knew better. The atmosphere here was not just a challenge for their technology, it was a test of their very survival. The true danger unfolds. The ship's ramp finally descended, revealing the full force of the storm. The cold hit them like a physical wall, a sudden shock that stole the air from Elise's lungs. Her fingers began to stiffen almost immediately, and she felt a creeping sense of panic rise in her chest. This was no ordinary cold. The wind howled, driving snowflakes like needles into their suits. As Kravox led the team out of the transport, Elise took a deep breath and scanned their surroundings. The others, her alien counterparts, were already struggling. Volyu, the young Meridian cadet, was moving more slowly than usual, his eyes wide as the wind slapped him in the face. His silver-gray skin shimmered faintly in the storm's harsh light, but even his species, known for its resilience to extreme conditions, was struggling. Kravox turned to Elise, his voice cutting through the wind. "Your assessment, Cadet Weber?" Elise didn't hesitate. "The storm isn't letting up. We're going to need shelter, and fast. We can't afford to push through in these conditions." The others were starting to lag behind. The Foster cadet, whose species had evolved underground, was now visibly slowing, his thick armor unable to compensate for the cold. Even Kravox, despite his exoskeletal strength, was moving stiffly, his joints creaking under the strain. "We need to get inside, or we risk hypothermia in minutes," Elise said, her voice firm, but full of urgency. Kravox hesitated, his pride unwilling to acknowledge that her advice might be the only thing standing between them and certain death. But Elise didn't wait for his approval. She moved swiftly, using her training, and led them toward an abandoned outpost they had located on their sensors earlier. The cold bit deeper as they trudged across the frozen ground, but Elise's every step was calculated, precise. She had learned to read the signs of Earth's storms, how the wind shifted, how the air felt when it was about to grow colder still. Every movement felt like it could be their last. But she was determined to prove them wrong. Humans didn't just survive the cold, they mastered it. And, as the storm began to rage harder, it was her knowledge of Earth's hostile environments that would determine if they lived or died. Part 3, The Transport Disaster. The descent toward Earth was anything but smooth. Elise Weber gripped the edge of her seat as the transport vessel shuddered violently, throwing the squad against the harnesses that secured them. The once steady hum of the engines began to sputter, and the lights flickered on and off. Outside the viewport, Earth's icy expanse seemed to grow larger, darker, more menacing with each passing second. Suddenly, a blinding flash filled the cabin, an explosion of white light so intense that it nearly overwhelmed their senses. A deafening crack followed, so loud it felt like the very fabric of the ship had been torn apart. Lightning, a bolt of pure electrical fury, had struck the transport. "System failure," the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, panicked and strained. Alarms blared, the shrill sound of sirens piercing the chaos. The ship bucked and twisted, the sudden shockwave from the lightning strike sending tremors through the hull. Kravox's voice rang out above the noise, cold and commanding as ever. "Keep it together, soldiers. It's just a minor disturbance. We're not out of this yet." But even Kravox, with his invulnerable exoskeleton, couldn't hide the tension in his voice. The Federation's advanced systems had been designed to handle the most extreme conditions, storms on distant alien worlds, the fiery heat of gas giants, the turbulence of asteroid fields, but this was Earth's wrath, a force they had never anticipated. Elise could see it now, the familiar pattern of gale force winds outside the ship's viewport, spiraling like a massive storm, pushing against them with brutal, unrelenting strength. The transport swayed, fighting to stay on course. The electrical surges from the lightning strike had damaged key systems, causing the ship to lose altitude rapidly. It was clear the Federation's equipment was failing them, and Earth's violent weather was pushing their limits. Kravox remained defiant, his ridged face set in a mask of determination, though his eyes betrayed the growing concern. He was not used to being caught off guard. "Prepare for atmospheric turbulence," he ordered, but the words held no confidence now. As the ship buckled under the increasing pressure of the storm, Elise saw her opportunity. She could hear the hiss of the ship's hydraulics as the ship's emergency stabilizers fought against the storm's fury. The Federation might have been advanced in technology, but this storm was chaotic, unpredictable, and beyond their calculated designs. "Kravox, we're not going to make it unless we change course now," Elise shouted over the cacophony of alarms. "The storm's intensity is beyond our simulations. We need to divert immediately." Kravox turned sharply toward her, his eyes narrowing, but there was no mockery in them now, just a cold, calculating gaze. "You have no experience in space flight, Cadet Weber. Trust in Federation systems. They've handled far worse than a terrestrial storm." But Elise had spent years in Earth's harshest climates. She knew the way the air changed when a storm like this one hit. The weight of the atmosphere, the dense clouds blocking out the sun, the way the temperature dropped like a hammer on their necks. She had seen this kind of storm before, had lived through the brutal, unpredictable shifts of Earth's weather systems that the Federation's technology had never experienced. "You're wrong, sir." Elise's voice was firm now, filled with an authority that even Kravox couldn't ignore. "We need to adjust course. I know this planet better than anyone else here. The storm is closing in, and if we don't adjust now, we'll be caught in its heart." For a long moment, Kravox said nothing, his face an unreadable mask. But the winds howled louder, the ship shuddering under their weight. Kravox's confidence cracked. For the first time, he hesitated. "Fine." His voice was gruff. "Make your adjustments, Cadet. But this better not turn into a waste of time." Elise didn't waste another second. Her instincts kicked in. She turned to the emergency controls, quickly calculating their new trajectory, adjusting the ship's descent path to avoid the most violent part of the storm. The Federation's systems may have failed, but she knew the landscape and the weather better than anyone. With Kravox watching silently, Elise moved swiftly. Her breath came in measured bursts as she recalibrated the ship's thrusters, modifying the descent parameters. Earth's weather was chaotic, but humans thrived in chaos. The Federation might have technology to handle the unknown, but humans had learned how to read nature's signs, how to survive against the odds. Adjusting trajectory, Elise muttered under her breath, watching the ship's external sensors flicker, the data flashing across the screen. "This will work." Kravox, still silent, turned away and made his way to the control panel, adjusting the altitude readings. He wasn't going to admit it, but there was something in his posture that suggested a grudging respect, maybe just the faintest recognition that her knowledge had proven essential. The ship descended with a final, violent jolt. They had barely managed to stay in the air, battling against the wind and freezing temperatures. As the vessel landed with a bone-jarring thud, Elise could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The landing ramp hissed open, and immediately, the freezing air of Siberia rushed in. The cold was unbearable, and the wind whipped fiercely, but it was nothing compared to the storm they had narrowly avoided. Elise was the only one prepared for this kind of environment. "Get out! Quickly!" Elise barked as the others began to gather their gear. She didn't wait for them to follow. Instead, she moved first, the cold air stinging her face like thousands of tiny needles. She had seen survival in these conditions firsthand. Growing up in northern Minnesota had taught her that. As the rest of the squad struggled with the harsh elements, their alien suits struggling against the cold, Elise was already thinking ahead. She knew how to survive Earth's most unforgiving climates. Building shelters, finding shelter, and using the environment against the storm, these were second nature to her. "Form a perimeter," Elise shouted, already gathering materials from the ship. "We need a windbreak or we won't make it out of here alive." The aliens, slow to react, seemed overwhelmed by the cold. Many of them had never experienced anything like this before. But Elise moved with purpose, guiding them as they struggled to understand the severity of the situation. She used the materials from the transport to create temporary barriers, protecting them from the fierce winds that could freeze their bodies in minutes. Even Prowess, with his superior exoskeleton, was starting to show signs of weakness. His movements were slower now, his once pristine armor now dented and cracked from the cold. "We need to keep moving, sir," Elise ordered. "We need shelter, and we need it now." Prowess growled under his breath but didn't argue. The storm raged around them, its fury relentless, but Elise had faced worse. The cold was her ally, the storm her adversary. She knew how to outsmart the chaos, and for once, Prowess had to admit that he couldn't do it alone. They would survive, but only if they followed her lead. Part 4: The Encounter with the Infected. The frozen wilderness stretched out before them like an endless ocean of white, the wind howling like an angry spirit, clawing at their exposed skin. The squad moved forward, trudging through the deep snow, the cold seeping into their bones despite their heavy suits. The Federation technology, so advanced on other worlds, had barely managed to function at the edge of Earth's harsh extremes. Temperature gauges flickered, struggling to maintain a semblance of control as the storm intensified around them. Suddenly, movement caught Elise's eye, a flicker in the snow, something darker against the pure white. She raised her hand, signaling the squad to stop. Her sharp gaze scanned the horizon, her heart pounding. Something was wrong. From the swirling white mist, shapes emerged: wolves, but they were not the wolves she remembered from Earth's wilderness. These creatures were unnaturally coordinated, moving as one, their bodies twisted and decayed, but their intelligence was unmistakable. Parasites, that much was clear. They had taken over the animals, transforming them into something far more dangerous. The wolves' eyes glowed with an eerie light, no longer driven by instinct but by something more sinister. Prowess, ever dismissive of human concerns, scowled. "They are nothing but beasts," he sneered. "We will handle them swiftly." But Elise knew better. These weren't just wild animals anymore, they had become tactical, organized. They were thinking, strategizing, using their pack mentality to form a coordinated assault. The creatures closed in, moving faster now, fangs bared and claws ready to tear through their ranks. The team braced themselves, weapons at the ready. But their suits designed for standard combat conditions weren't enough. In the extreme cold, the systems were failing. The wind howled too loud, and the snow obscured their vision. The lasers they fired barely cut through the thick air before dissipating into the wind, and projectiles had little more effect. Kravox gave an order to engage, but the wolves pressed in. Elise's gaze snapped between the advancing pack and her squad's faltering morale. She knew they were outmatched in these conditions. Technology, no matter how advanced, wasn't enough to overcome Earth's brutal reality. Her decision came quickly. Intuition and experience took over the terrain. Was her ally. Elise saw the thin ice ahead, a stretch of frozen water that seemed like a natural trap. The wolves' weight increased by the parasite would be too much for the fragile ice to bear. With military precision, Elise shouted, "Retreat! Move back toward the ice." The squad hesitated, confused, but Elise was already moving, leading the pack to the weak point. As she had predicted, the wolves followed ruthlessly pursuing, their eyes locked on their prey. As the first wolf's claws scraped the ice, the ground gave way beneath them. The ice cracked, sending the infected creatures plummeting into the freezing waters below, their screeches silenced by the violent splash. The rest of the pack, disoriented and panicked, hesitated at the edge, but the damage was done. The parasite could not survive immersion in these waters, not at Earth's brutal temperatures. One by one, the wolves were swallowed by the depths, and the rest of the pack scattered, vanishing back into the storm. Elise stood, breath heavy, watching as the last of the creatures disappeared into the icy abyss. "That's how you survive." Her voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the fire behind it. Kravox's gaze flicked to her, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he didn't sneer at her. He just nodded, perhaps with the smallest measure of respect. Part 5, The Harsh Realities of Survival. With the immediate threat of the infected wolves behind them, the squad pushed on, but the cold was relentless. The storm showed no mercy, and the temperature continued to plummet, causing the Federation suits to struggle even more. The thermal regulators that should have been their lifeline flickered, weakened under the pressure of Earth's harsh conditions. "These suits won't last much longer," Trisket, the Fakaran technical expert, confirmed, his voice muffled through his helmet. "The environmental systems are failing. We've got maybe 4 hours before they are completely ineffective." Elise knew it was true. The Federation's technology might be advanced, but it was designed for the controlled environments of the galaxy's most predictable planets, not for Earth's wild unpredictability. The squad was fighting the cold, their movements becoming sluggish as the temperature dipped below -60 degrees Celsius, and even their environmental suits could not keep up. Kravox, though physically superior to everyone else, was beginning to falter. His exoskeleton, designed for maximum strength and flexibility in most environments, was showing signs of stress, his joints stiffening, his movements growing more labored with each step. He had been too proud to listen, but now it was clear, the cold was breaking him down. Elise, on the other hand, was still moving with precision and confidence, leading the squad through the brutal terrain. She wasn't immune to the cold, no one was, but her experience with Earth's winters had made her resilient, capable of adapting even in the most dangerous situations. While Kravox's armor creaked with every movement, her fingers were frozen stiff, but they didn't stop working. She continued to guide the team through the treacherous landscape, adapting to the terrain, using the storm to her advantage. As they neared their destination, the research outpost Kravox's voice broke through the silence. "We've made it because of you, Weber." His voice was strained, less authoritative than usual. "I admit, your survival skills are unlike anything I've seen before." Elise didn't respond at first. There was no need to. She had saved them, not with brute strength or Federation tech, but with a will to adapt, a trait that humans had honed over millennia. Kravox's exoskeleton groaned as he shifted, but he met her eyes. "Perhaps I misjudged your kind. I thought humanity's weaknesses would be its undoing. But you've proven that it's your ability to survive that makes you stronger." Elise didn't smile. She wasn't here for recognition. She was here to protect them, to keep them alive. And she had done it, using the same instincts that had helped her survive the bitter cold of Earth's most unforgiving winters. It was the human spirit, the drive to persevere, that had carried them through. They were still standing because humans had learned to survive against the odds. The outpost loomed ahead, the dark silhouette of the facility standing strong against the relentless storm. The mission was far from over, but Elise had proven something more important, that even in the harshest of environments, it was the human heart ability to adapt that made all the difference. And in that moment, Kravox knew, no matter how strong, no matter how advanced the Federation was, it would always be humanity's ingenuity and willpower that would turn the tide. Part 6, The Final Push. The research outpost loomed before them, a crumbling structure, its metal walls scarred from the constant assault of the storm. What was once a place of scientific discovery had now become a dead zone, evidence of the parasite's relentless spread scattered throughout the facility. The air smelled faintly of decay and burned ozone, a reminder of the battle that had raged here. Elise led the squad through the wreckage, her eyes scanning the environment with the precision of someone who had lived through more than her share of dangerous situations. She could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. Every step she took felt like it could be her last, but her determination was unshakable. The Federation's equipment might have failed them, and even the best of their technology couldn't handle Earth's harsh environments, but she was still standing, still leading. The containment equipment was heavy, designed to hold the parasite long enough for the Federation's scientists to analyze and neutralize it. But that wasn't the hard part. The real challenge was keeping the team alive long enough to deliver it. Kravox, his exoskeleton showing signs of serious damage, limped behind her. His armor, once a symbol of his superior strength, was now a testament to the brutal power of Earth's extremes. His joints creaked with every step, his movements slower, stiffer than they had been before. The storm had not only tested their equipment, it had tested them, humans and aliens alike. But it was Elise's ability to adapt that had kept them alive, and as much as it pained him to admit it, Kravox knew it. The squad made their way inside the outpost, finding the research facility in disarray. The containment chambers were damaged, the power flickering, and the data systems barely functional. Still, they pushed forward. Elise took charge, directing the team to set up the containment equipment with the calm efficiency of someone who had lived through far worse. The rest of the team followed, working in unison, their movements more coordinated now. Kravox, still struggling against the cold, watched her from the corner of his eye. The Haxar sergeant, who had once scoffed at humans for their fragility, was now standing in awe of what Elise had accomplished. He had seen the way she led the team not through force, but through sheer will and intelligence. She had managed to keep them alive, even when every element of their mission had been designed to break them down. "You're doing well, Cadet Weber." Kravox's voice was low, reluctant. The words seemed to carry weight, like he was forcing them out, but there was no mistaking the respect behind them. Elise didn't look up from her task. "We're not done yet, Sergeant. We still need to stabilize the facility and ensure the containment system is secure." Her focus was unbroken, but she could feel Kravox's eyes on her. She knew this moment had come, a moment of truth, where respect would be earned through action, not words. With the equipment finally in place, the team moved to stabilize the system. The researchers, the few that had survived, watched them with weary eyes, grateful but exhausted. The parasite had taken its toll, and the facility was on the brink of collapse. Elise worked with precision, coordinating with Trisket, the Fakrin expert, to ensure the parasite was properly contained. Her mind was sharp, every move calculated. She had lived in the cold long enough to know how to manage the smallest details. The storm outside raged on, but here, inside the shelter of the facility, Elise had finally brought some semblance of order back to the chaos. As they completed the final steps of the operation, Kravox approached Elise. His movements were slower now, his body aching, but his mind was clear. He stood beside her as the last of the containment equipment powered up. "I see it now, Cadet Weber." His voice was quieter than before, more thoughtful. "I was wrong about humans." Elise paused, finally meeting his gaze. She had expected him to mock her, to make some cutting remark. But instead, he spoke with a sincerity she hadn't heard from him before. "You've proved that even in the harshest conditions, humans have something more than strength. You've survived with your adaptability. It's not just a survival instinct, it's your greatest weapon. No technology can match it." Elise didn't smile. She had nothing to prove anymore. She had led them to safety, survived the worst Earth could throw at them, and had brought them all here, to the point where the mission was almost complete. Kravox stepped back, and for the first time, Elise saw a flicker of something in his eyes: respect. True respect, born from the harsh reality of their shared survival. The storm outside began to subside, and with it, the heavy weight of their struggle. The outpost, now secured, was their final foothold. They had done it. They had survived. Kravox did something unexpected. He stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "I will be submitting a recommendation to Federation Command," he said. "Incorporating human survival strategies into our training programs. You have proven something that no alien species has been able to grasp until now: the ability to adapt is more powerful than the most advanced technology." Elise nodded. There was nothing else to say. The journey was far from over, but they had reached a significant milestone. Kravox had finally recognized the core truth that humanity's greatest strength was not in its size or strength, but in its ability to adapt in the face of unimaginable odds. She turned to face the horizon, where the storm clouds were finally beginning to break. The worst was over, but Elise knew this wouldn't be the last challenge she would face. Humans had been through so much and had survived. That resilience, that willingness to never give up, was what made them dangerous. And for Kravox, that was something worth respecting.